I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd have to question her own children's loyalty. After 43 years of marriage, 37 years of motherhood, and a lifetime of putting my family first, I discovered a secret will hidden in my late husband's study. A will that my children had known about for years. A will that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. And what I did next? Well, let's just say they never saw it coming. My name is Evelyn Margaret Hartwell, and I'm 72 years old. For the past 5 years since my husband Richard passed away, I've been living in what I thought was our family home. The 3-story Victorian on Maple Street that Richard and I bought when we were newlyweds in 1975. This house has been the center of our family universe. Every Christmas morning, every birthday celebration, every Sunday dinner happened within these walls. I raised 3 children here: Margaret, Thomas, and little Sarah. I watched them grow from babies to accomplished adults, and I was so proud. After Richard died from a sudden heart attack, I grieved deeply. We'd planned to travel the world together in retirement, but cancer had other plans for us first, and then his heart just gave out one morning while he was reading the newspaper in his favorite chair. The children were wonderful during that time, or so I thought. Margaret flew in from Chicago, Thomas drove up from the city with his wife Jennifer, and Sarah stayed with me for 2 whole weeks, sleeping in her old room like she was a teenager again. But grief has a way of blinding you to things. Things you should notice. Things you should question. I'd been supporting my children financially for years. Even after Richard's death, Margaret was going through what she called a career transition, which seemed to mean she was between jobs more often than she was employed. Thomas had invested in a startup that was perpetually about to take off, and Sarah's graduate school expenses were mounting. Richard had left me comfortable, a decent life insurance policy, his pension, and the house fully paid off. I had enough to help them, so I did. That's what mothers do, isn't it? Every month I'd write checks. $500 to Margaret for her rent in Chicago. $1,000 to Thomas for his business expenses. $1,500 to Sarah for her tuition and living costs. It added up quickly, but they were my children. I'd worked as a high school English teacher for 35 years, and Richard had been an accountant at the same firm for his entire career. We'd saved diligently. We'd planned carefully. This money was meant to help our family thrive. But there were signs I should have caught. Last Thanksgiving, I overheard Margaret and Thomas talking in hushed voices in the kitchen, while I was setting the dining room table. Margaret was saying something about waiting and being patient, and Thomas responded with, "She's healthy, it could be years." I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed they were discussing one of their father's elderly relatives, maybe Aunt Dorothy, who was 96 and still going strong in her nursing home. Then there was the incident with the financial advisor. About 3 years after Richard's passing, Sarah suggested I meet with a financial planner she knew. "Just to make sure everything is organized, Mom," she'd said sweetly. The man, Mr. Peterson, came to the house with a briefcase full of papers. He asked detailed questions about my assets, my accounts, my investments. At the time I thought Sarah was being thoughtful, helping me manage my affairs. Now I wonder what information he reported back to her. The children started visiting more frequently about 2 years ago, but the visits felt different. They'd arrive with smiles and hugs, but within an hour, someone would find an excuse to wander through the house. Margaret spent a peculiar amount of time examining my antiques, even taking photos of some pieces. Thomas kept asking about the house's market value, disguising it as casual conversation about the neighborhood's development. Sarah volunteered to help organize Richard's study, insisting that I shouldn't have to deal with his papers alone. I let her help me. God, how could I have been so blind? We spent 2 weeks going through Richard's filing cabinets together. Sarah was methodical, creating piles for taxes, insurance documents, investment statements, and personal papers. She was so helpful, so caring. She made us tea in the afternoons and would pat my hand when I got emotional looking at Richard's handwriting on various documents. "It's okay, Mom," she'd say. "We're doing this together." But she must have found it then. The will. The secret will that wasn't in the safety deposit box with our official estate documents, but tucked away in a false bottom drawer of Richard's mahogany desk. A desk that had belonged to his grandfather and had all sorts of hidden compartments that Richard had delighted in showing me when we first acquired it. I didn't discover it until last month. Last month, when everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning in September. The leaves were just beginning to turn those gorgeous shades of amber and crimson that made our street look like a painting. I decided to finally tackle the study myself, to truly clean it out and perhaps convert it into a reading room. Richard had been gone 5 years, and while I still missed him every single day, I was ready to make the space my own. I was dusting the desk when I accidentally knocked over a heavy bookend. It fell against the side panel of one of the drawers, and I heard a strange clicking sound. When I pulled the drawer out to check for damage, the bottom shifted. My heart started pounding as I realized what I'd found. One of Richard's secret compartments, one I'd completely forgotten about. Inside was a manila envelope, unsealed, with last will and testament of Richard James Hartwell written in my husband's careful handwriting across the front. Below it, a date. March 15, 2018. March 2018. Just 2 months before he died. My hands trembled as I pulled out the documents. Why would Richard have created a separate will? We'd made our wills together with our attorney, Mr. Jacobson, back in 2005. Those wills were straightforward. Everything to the surviving spouse, and upon that spouse's death, everything divided equally among our 3 children. Simple. Fair. That's what we'd always said. But this will was different. I sat down in Richard's leather chair, my leather chair now I suppose, and began to read. The language was formal, clearly drafted by an attorney, though not Mr. Jacobson, based on the letterhead at the top. This was from a firm in the city, Whitmore and Associates. The will began standardly enough, revoking all previous wills and codicils. Then came the specific bequests and my heart nearly stopped. To my beloved wife, Evelyn Margaret Hartwell, I leave the sum of 0,000 and the right to reside in the marital home located at 847 Maple Street for a period not to exceed 2 years from the date of my death, provided she maintains the property in good condition. 2 years. He was giving me 2 years in my own home. I kept reading, my vision blurring with tears. The property located at 847 Maple Street, along with all furnishings, antiques, and items contained therein, I leave jointly to my 3 children, Margaret and Hartwell Peterson, Thomas James Hartwell, and Sarah Elizabeth Hartwell, to be divided equally among them. My house. The house I'd made a home for 43 years. The house where I'd raised our children, where I'd nursed Richard through his illness, where I'd created thousands of memories. He was leaving it to the children, with me as just a temporary resident. But it got worse. So much worse. My investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $0.2 million, and held with Sterling Investment Group under account number 847-291XXX. I leave jointly to my 3 children, to be divided equally among them. $1.2 million. I'd known about Richard's pension and his life insurance, about our joint savings account. But this was news to me. An investment account I'd never heard of, worth more than $1 million, and he was leaving it entirely to the children. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The study seemed to be closing in around me. This couldn't be real. Richard loved me. We'd been partners in everything. We'd always said we'd take care of each other first, and then the children would inherit whatever was left when we were both gone. I forced myself to keep reading. There were smaller bequests. His golf clubs to Thomas, his coin collection to Margaret, his vintage watch collection to Sarah. Then came a paragraph that made my blood run cold. I make these provisions recognizing that my wife Evelyn has her own retirement income from her teaching pension and Social Security, which should be sufficient for her needs in her remaining years. My children have greater financial burdens and opportunities ahead of them, and I wish to provide them with the resources to succeed in their endeavors. My remaining years. As if I were already halfway to the grave. And my teaching pension, which was modest at best, barely $800 a month, was supposed to be sufficient while they got over $1 million to divide among themselves? The final blow came in the last substantive paragraph. I have discussed these provisions with my children, who understand and support my wishes. I trust they will ensure their mother is cared for appropriately, and that the transition of the property occurs smoothly, and with respect for their mother's dignity. He discussed it with them. They knew. All 3 of my children had known about this will, had known that their father was planning to leave me with virtually nothing while they inherited the bulk of his estate, and not one of them had said a word to me. For 5 years I'd been supporting them financially, writing checks every month, helping with their expenses, while they sat on the knowledge that they were already set to inherit everything. For 5 years they'd visited and hugged me and called me on Sundays, all while knowing this secret. I sat in that study for 3 hours reading and rereading the will, trying to make sense of it. Why would Richard do this? Had I failed him somehow in our marriage? Had he been angry with me about something? We'd had our disagreements over the years, what couple doesn't, but nothing that would warrant this kind of betrayal. Then I started thinking about the timing. March 2018. Richard had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in January of that year. The doctors had given him 6 months, maybe a year, with aggressive treatment. He died in May, just 3 months after signing this will. Had he been in his right mind? The cancer had been aggressive, and he'd been on pain medications. But the will was clearly professionally drafted, witnessed, and notarized. It would likely hold up in court. But here's what didn't make sense. If this will was valid and the children knew about it, why hadn't they enforced it? Richard had died in May 2018. It was now September 2023, over 5 years later. The will clearly stated I could only live in the house for 2 years after his death. That deadline had passed in May 2020, more than 3 years ago. Why hadn't they said anything? I stood up from the desk, my legs shaky, and walked to the window. The street outside looked so normal, so peaceful. Mrs. Chun was walking her little terrier. The mailman was making his rounds. The world kept turning while mine had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. I needed to think. I needed to understand what was happening before I confronted anyone. I took the will and made copies of every page on the printer in the study. Then I put the original back in the secret compartment, making sure everything looked exactly as it had before. If the children knew about this will and hadn't mentioned it, there had to be a reason. I needed to find out what that reason was. That evening Sarah called. She did this every Tuesday like clockwork. "Hi, Mom. How are you? What did you do today?" I almost told her. The words were right there, pressing against my teeth, demanding to be spoken. But something stopped me. Instead I said, "Oh, just some cleaning. I'm thinking of turning your father's study into a reading room." There was the briefest pause on the other end of the line. "The study? Are you sure you're ready for that, Mom?" "It's been 5 years, sweetheart. I think it's time." "Well, if you need help, I can come this weekend. I wouldn't want you to throw away anything important." I bet she wouldn't. "That's sweet of you, dear, but I'm just doing some light organizing. Nothing dramatic." We chatted for a few more minutes about her classes. She was in her 4th year of a PhD program in psychology, funded largely by my monthly checks. After we hung up, I sat in the living room in the dark thinking. By the next morning I'd made a decision. I needed professional help. I needed to understand what my legal position was, what that will meant, and why my children hadn't executed it. I called Mr. Jacobson, our longtime family attorney, but his secretary informed me he'd retired 2 years ago. She gave me the name of the attorney who'd taken over his practice, a woman named Patricia Vance. I made an appointment for Friday afternoon. Those 3 days until my appointment were torture. I went through the motions of my normal routine, my morning walks, my book club on Wednesday, my volunteer shift at the library on Thursday, but my mind was constantly churning. I watched my children's faces in the family photos scattered throughout the house, searching for some sign of the betrayal I now knew they were capable of. On Wednesday afternoon, Margaret called. This was unusual. Margaret usually texted rather than called. "Hey, Mom. Sarah mentioned you're finally cleaning out Dad's study. So they were talking about it. Interesting. Just thinking about it," I said carefully. "Why?" "No reason. I was just thinking there might be some of Dad's things in there that we'd like to have. You know, for sentimental reasons. Maybe I should come help you go through everything." "That's thoughtful, honey, but I'm not in any rush. I'll let you know if I find anything that belongs to you children." "Well, actually, Thomas and I were thinking of coming to visit this weekend. We haven't all been together in a while. We could help you with the study and maybe take you out for dinner." My 3 children, all suddenly eager to help with the study, all suddenly available the same weekend. This wasn't a coincidence. "This weekend isn't good for me," I lied. "I have plans with Eleanor from book club. Maybe later this month." Margaret sounded frustrated when we hung up. Good. Let them wonder what I was doing. Friday afternoon, I sat in Patricia Vance's office. a modern space with glass walls and minimalist furniture that couldn't have been more different from Mr. Jacobson's old-fashioned wood-paneled office. Patricia herself was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and direct. "Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for bringing this to me. This is quite a complicated situation." She'd been reviewing the copies of the will for 20 minutes, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Is it valid?" I asked. "Could they enforce it?" Patricia leaned back in her chair. "That's a complex question. The will appears to be properly executed. It's signed, witnessed, and notarized. However, there are several significant issues here." She ticked them off on her fingers. "First, you mentioned that you and your husband had previous wills drawn up by Mr. Jacobson. Those wills left everything to the surviving spouse. This will was created later, so normally it would supersede those earlier wills due to the revocation clause." My heart sank. "However," Patricia continued, "there's a major problem. After your husband's death, was his estate probated?" "Yes, through Mr. Jacobson. It was very straightforward. Everything came to me as the surviving spouse." "And which will was submitted to the probate court?" "The one we'd made together, back in 2005. Patricia nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "That's what I thought. Mrs. Hartwell, if your children knew about this later will and deliberately failed to submit it to the probate court, they committed fraud. By allowing the 2005 will to be probated, they effectively allowed you to inherit everything under that earlier document. The estate is closed. Those assets have been legally transferred to you. They can't now come back 5 years later and say, 'Actually, there was a different will.'" I felt like I could breathe for the first time in days. "So the house is mine? Legally mine. If it was transferred to you through the probate of the 2005 will, yes, it's yours. But Mrs. Hartwell, we need to investigate something else. You mentioned a $0.2 million investment account that you'd never heard of." "Yes, with Sterling Investment Group." Patricia made a note. "We need to find out if that account exists, if it was included in the probated estate, and where that money went. If your children somehow accessed that account without probating this second will, that's theft. If the account was included in the probate and came to you, then it should be in your name now." She leaned forward. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need to ask you something important. How much have you given your children financially since your husband's death?" I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "I send them monthly stipends. $500 to Margaret, $1,000 to Thomas, $1,500 to Sarah. So, $3,000 a month total." Patricia's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. "For 5 years?" "Yes. That's $80,000. She said it matter-of-factly, but the number hung in the air like an accusation. "Mrs. Hartwell, with your permission, I'd like to do some investigating. I want to find out what happened to that investment account, confirm your ownership of the house and other assets, and determine exactly what your children knew and when they knew it." "How long will that take?" "A few weeks, maybe less. In the meantime, I advise you not to mention any of this to your children. Don't let them know you found the will. And definitely don't let them know you've consulted an attorney. They're already suspicious. They all want to come help me clean out the study this weekend." Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who knew how to play chess. "Then let them come. Let them see that the study is still intact, that you haven't found anything unusual." "But Mrs. Hartwell, I'd moved that will to a safer location. Do you have a safety deposit box?" "Yes, at First National Bank. Put the original there. Today. And don't tell anyone you've done it." I left Patricia's office feeling like I'd been given a lifeline. For the first time since finding that will, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like someone taking action, taking control of my own life. I went straight to the bank and locked the will away in my safety deposit box. Then I called Margaret and told her that I'd changed my mind about the weekend. She and her siblings were welcome to come help with the study after all. That Saturday was an Oscar-worthy performance on my part, if I do say so myself. All 3 of my children arrived at the house around noon, armed with boxes and cleaning supplies and forced smiles. "Mom, you look tired," Sarah said, kissing my cheek. "Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine, dear. Just excited to finally tackle this project." We ordered pizza for lunch, and then the 4 of us headed to the study. I watched them carefully as we entered the room. Margaret's eyes went immediately to the desk. Thomas wandered to the filing cabinets, running his hand along the top drawer. Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment, her gaze sweeping the room as if cataloging everything. "So, Mom, what exactly are you planning to do with this space?" Thomas asked. "I thought I'd turn it into a reading room. Get rid of some of this heavy furniture, bring in a comfortable chair, better lighting. Make it cozy." "What about Dad's desk?" Margaret asked. "That's a family heirloom. It belonged to Grandpa Hartwell." "I'm aware of its history, Margaret. I was married to your father for 43 years. She had the grace to look embarrassed. "Of course, Mom. I just meant, well, maybe one of us should take it? If you're redecorating anyway." There it was. They wanted the desk. Of course they did, they thought the will might still be in it. "I haven't decided what I'm doing with the furniture yet," I said mildly. "Let's focus on the papers for now." We spent the next 3 hours going through files. Every so often, one of my children would find an excuse to check the desk drawers. Thomas volunteered to dust it thoroughly. Margaret suggested we make sure all the drawers are empty before deciding its fate. Sarah offered to organize the desk supplies. I let them look. I even left the room at one point, claiming I needed to use the bathroom, and I'm certain that in those 5 minutes, they frantically searched every inch of that desk for the will that was no longer there. When I returned, they all looked tense and frustrated. "Everything okay?" I asked innocently. "Fine, Mom," Sarah said, but her smile was strained. "We were just saying how well preserved this desk is. It's a real antique. Your father took good care of his things." We finished up around 5 o'clock. The children were eager to leave, but I insisted they stay for dinner. I wanted them off balance, uncertain. I wanted them to wonder what I knew. Over my homemade lasagna, Richard's favorite recipe, I brought up something I'd been thinking about. "You know, kids, I've been reconsidering my finances. I'm 72 years old and I need to think about my own future. The monthly help I've been giving you, I think I need to reduce it. Maybe stop it altogether." You could have heard a pin drop. "What?" Margaret said. "Mom, I'm counting on that money for rent. And I'm counting on it to keep my business afloat until the next round of funding," Thomas added. Sarah said nothing, but her knuckles were white around her fork. "I'm sorry, but I need to be more careful with my resources. I don't know how many years I have left, and I can't afford to deplete my savings." "But Mom," Margaret said, her voice taking on a wheedling tone I found suddenly revolting, "you have plenty. Dad left you well provided for." "Did he?" I looked at her directly. "How would you know what your father left me, Margaret?" She flushed. I assumed. "He was always good with money." "Assumptions can be dangerous," I said. The rest of dinner was strained. My children left as soon as they politely could, and I watched from the window as they huddled together on the front walk, talking urgently. Margaret was gesturing animatedly. Thomas looked angry. Sarah had her arms crossed, her expression troubled. Let them worry, I thought. Let them wonder what I know and what I'm planning. The next 2 weeks were illuminating. My children suddenly became very attentive. Margaret called every other day. Thomas stopped by twice with flowers, claiming he just wanted to check in. Sarah invited me to lunch, during which she carefully asked about my financial situation and whether I needed help managing my accounts. I was polite but non-committal, and I waited for Patricia Vance to call. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. "Mrs. Hartwell, I have news. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Is it good news or bad news?" "Bit of both. But I think you'll want to hear this in person." Thursday morning I sat across from Patricia again. This time she had a thick folder of documents on her desk. "I've been thorough," she said. "And what I've found is disturbing, but also gives us a very strong position." She opened the folder. First, the investment account. It does exist, or rather, it did exist. It was worth $0.3 million at the time of your husband's death, even more than the will indicated. "Was?" I echoed. "The account was liquidated 3 months after your husband's death, in August 2018. The money was transferred to 3 separate accounts, one in Margaret's name, one in Thomas's name, and one in Sarah's name. Each received approximately $33,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. They took it. They did. But here's where it gets interesting. This account was not disclosed during probate. The 2005 will was submitted. The estate went through probate with Mr. Jacobson handling it, and this investment account was never mentioned. Mr. Jacobson likely had no idea it existed. But that's fraud. That's fraud, Mrs. Hartwell. By concealing this asset from the probate court and then liquidating it for their own benefit, your children committed fraud against your husband's estate, which means they stole from you, the rightful heir. Patricia pulled out more papers. It gets worse. Or better, depending on how you look at it. I pulled the records from Sterling Investment Group. The account was a joint account, in both your husband's name and yours. You were a co-owner, Mrs. Hartwell. When your husband died, that account should have automatically passed to you without even going through probate. But the investment firm was notified that the account should be closed and the assets distributed according to the decedent's wishes. They were given a copy of the 2018 will. So the children did use that will, I said slowly. But only for that one purpose. Exactly. They used it to steal $0.3 million from you, but they didn't submit it to probate court because that would have alerted you to its existence and to their theft. Instead, they probated the 2005 will, which gave you the house and the other known assets, and they quietly took the investment account for themselves. I sat back trying to process this. My children, the babies I'd raised, the people I'd loved and sacrificed for, had stolen over $1 million from me. And then, having done so, they'd continued to accept my monthly checks, my financial support, for 5 additional years. There's one more thing, Patricia said gently. I had a forensic accountant look at the children's financial activities since 2018. Margaret bought a condo in Chicago in 2019, she paid cash. Thomas's struggling startup received a capital infusion of $0.000 in 2018 from a private investor. I'm willing to bet that investor was Thomas himself. And Sarah's tuition? She paid it in full through 2020. The money you've been sending her for school expenses has been going into a high-yield savings account. She currently has about $7,000 saved. I couldn't speak. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt physically ill. What can I do? I finally asked. Patricia smiled that chess player smile again. We have several options. We can report them to the district attorney for fraud and theft. We can file a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds plus interest, which would now be over $0.5 million with the market returns they've likely earned. We can do both. If we file criminal charges, would they go to jail? Possibly. This is a serious crime. Fraud against an estate. Theft of over $1 million. The DA would likely be interested. I thought about this. My children in prison. It's what they deserved, wasn't it? But they were still my children. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the theft and the lies, I changed their diapers and stayed up with them when they were sick and cheered at their school plays and graduations. What if, I said slowly, what if I wanted to handle this differently? Patricia tilted her head. What did you have in mind? I want my money back. I want every penny they stole plus interest. I want them to repay every dollar I've sent them over the past 5 years. And I want them to understand exactly what they did, what they're capable of. But I don't want them in prison. That's generous of you. Maybe. Or maybe I just don't want to spend my remaining years visiting my children in jail. I leaned forward. Can you draft a document, something legal and binding that lays all this out? The theft, the fraud, the amounts owed? Something that makes clear that I could prosecute but I'm choosing not to, if they meet my terms. Patricia was already making notes. A settlement agreement with a criminal complaint held in abeyance. If they don't comply with the terms, you can file the criminal complaint. Yes, I can absolutely do that. How fast can you have it ready? 1 week. Make it fast. I'm having Sunday dinner with my children this weekend. I'd like to serve this along with dessert. Patricia laughed, a genuine sound of delight. Mrs. Hartwell, I think you and I are going to get along just fine. That week felt like the longest of my life. I went through my daily routines in a daze, my mind constantly rehearsing what I would say, how I would confront them. Part of me still couldn't believe I was doing this, confronting my own children, threatening them with legal action. But then I'd remember that they'd stolen from me, that they'd lied to me for 5 years, that they'd taken my money every month while sitting on their stolen fortune, and my resolve would harden. On Saturday, Patricia called. It's ready. All 3 copies, one for each child. I've also prepared a detailed accounting of everything they owe, with the principal from the investment account, the interest it would have earned, and repayment of your monthly support. They each owe approximately $60,000. I whistled. Will they have it? If they invest it even conservatively, they should. Thomas's business is actually quite successful now. I did some digging. Margaret's condo has appreciated significantly. And Sarah has her savings, plus she's due to receive a substantial signing bonus from a job she's accepted starting next fall. They have the means. Good. Sunday morning I cooked. I made all of their childhood favorites. Pot roast with roasted vegetables, my famous scalloped potatoes, fresh dinner rolls, and a chocolate cake for dessert. I set the dining room table with my best china and linens. If this was going to be a last supper of sorts, it would be a proper one. The children arrived separately, Margaret at 1, Thomas at 2, Sarah at 2:30. They seemed surprised to see each other. Did you all plan to come today? I asked innocently. What a wonderful coincidence. We had cocktails in the living room first. I made martinis, something I hadn't done since Richard died. My hands were surprisingly steady as I mixed the drinks. This is nice, Mom, Sarah said, looking around at her siblings. We should do this more often. Yes, I agreed. Family time is so important. You never know when it might end. Thomas gave me a sharp look, but I just smiled and sipped my martini. Dinner was at 4. I'd invited Patricia to join us at 5:30 for dessert, telling the children that I'd made a new friend and wanted them to meet her. They seemed puzzled but agreeable. The dinner conversation was strained. My children were clearly wondering why I'd invited them all on the same day, why I was being so formal and gracious. They kept exchanging glances, trying to communicate silently. I let them wonder. At 5:20, I served the chocolate cake and fresh coffee. At 5:30 exactly, the doorbell rang. That must be Patricia, I said cheerfully. Sarah, would you get the door? Patricia entered carrying a sleek leather briefcase. She was dressed in a sharp gray suit and looked every inch the powerful attorney she was. Children, this is Patricia Vance. She's an attorney. Patricia, these are my children, Margaret, Thomas, and Sarah. I watched the color drain from their faces. An attorney? Margaret said weakly. Mom, what's going on? Why don't we all sit down? Patricia suggested smoothly. Mrs. Hartwell has something she'd like to discuss with you. We moved to the living room. My children sat together on the couch, united in their sudden fear. Patricia and I took the chairs across from them. Patricia opened her briefcase and removed 3 thick envelopes. Mom, you're scaring us, Sarah said. What is this about? I looked at my 3 children, these people I'd created and raised and loved, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. This is about a will, I said. A will that your father created in March of 2018, 2 months before he died. A will that left me almost nothing and gave the bulk of his estate to the 3 of you. A will that you all knew about but never told me about. Thomas started to speak, but I held up my hand. A will that you decided not to probate, probably because it would have left me with very little and you worried about how that would look, or maybe you just weren't ready to throw me out of my house. But a will you did use to steal $0.3 million from an investment account that was in both my name and your father's name. An account you liquidated and split among yourselves just 3 months after your father died. Margaret had tears streaming down her face. Mom, we can explain. Can you? Can you explain how you stole over $1 million from me, and then continued to accept my monthly financial support for 5 additional years? Can you explain how you let me write you checks for $80,000 while you were sitting on a fortune that you'd stolen from me? Dad wanted us to have that money, Thomas said, his voice angry now. He put it in that will. We were just following his wishes. Then why didn't you probate the will? Patricia asked quietly. If you were just following your father's wishes, why did you commit fraud by concealing that asset from probate and then accessing it without court authorization? Silence. I'll tell you why, I said. Because you knew it was wrong. You knew that account was half mine. You knew that taking it without probating the will was theft. But you wanted the money more than you wanted to do the right thing. Mom, please, Sarah whispered. We're sorry. We'll give it back. Yes, I said. You will. Patricia handed each of them an envelope. Inside, you'll find a detailed accounting of what you stole, what you've received from your mother since the theft, and what you owe her with interest. You'll also find a settlement agreement. Sign it and agree to the repayment terms, and your mother will not file criminal charges against you. Criminal charges? Margaret's voice was barely audible. What you did is fraud and theft, Patricia said matter-of-factly. It's a felony. You could each face 5 to 10 years in prison. Thomas opened his envelope with shaking hands. $560,000? Each. With interest, and with repayment of the money you took from your mother under false pretenses, yes. We don't have that kind of money, Margaret said. Yes, you do, I replied. Patricia has done her homework. You have assets, all of you. I'm giving you 3 months to liquidate what you need to liquidate and pay me back. Every penny. And if we don't? Thomas asked, a trace of defiance in his voice. Patricia smiled. Then Mrs. Hartwell files the criminal complaint I've already drafted, and we let the district attorney decide your fate. I've been in contact with them. They're very interested in this case. The fight went out of Thomas. He slumped back on the couch, the papers falling from his hands. How could you do this to us? Margaret sobbed. We're your children. And there it was, the attempted guilt trip, the appeal to motherhood, the expectation that I would put their needs above my own dignity and rights. How could I? I repeated, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. How could you do this to me? I'm your mother. I raised you, loved you, supported you even when you were grown adults who should have been standing on your own feet. And you repaid me by stealing from me and lying to me for 5 years. Dad wanted, Thomas started. I don't care what your father wanted. The words burst out of me, surprising even myself. Your father was dying, he was on pain medication, and he made a decision that cut me out of the life we'd built together. Maybe he had his reasons, maybe he didn't. Maybe he wasn't thinking clearly. I'll never know. But you three? You made a conscious decision to steal from me. Not once, but every day for 5 years. Every time you cashed one of my checks, every time you called and pretended everything was fine, you were lying to me and betraying me. I stood up. I was shaking, but my voice was steady. You're my children, and I love you. I will always love you. But I will not let you treat me like a fool. I will not let you steal from me and lie to me and think there are no consequences. Sign the agreements, pay me back, and maybe we can rebuild some kind of relationship someday. But it will never be what it was. You've destroyed that. Patricia stood as well. You have until the end of the week to return signed agreements. You have 3 months from the date of signing to make payment in full. The terms are not negotiable. She handed me a folder. Mrs. Hartwell, I'll leave these extra copies with you. If you need anything, call me anytime. After she left, my children sat in stunned silence. I walked to the front door and opened it. I think you should go now, I said. Margaret was crying openly. Mom, please. Can't we talk about this? What's there to talk about? You stole from me. Now you'll pay me back. Those are the facts. We made a mistake, Sarah said. We were young and stupid and Dad had just died and… You're 34 years old, I interrupted. You have a PhD, you're about to start a prestigious job, and you've saved $7,000 of my money under the pretense of needing it for school. Don't tell me you were young and stupid. You knew exactly what you were doing. Thomas stood up. Come on, he said to his sisters. She's made up her mind. They filed past me, not meeting my eyes. At the door, Margaret turned back. Did you ever love us? She asked. Or was it all just conditional? I looked at my daughter, my firstborn, the baby girl I'd rocked to sleep and taught to read and helped through her first heartbreak. I love you more than you'll ever understand, I said. That's why this hurts so much. And that's why I'm doing it. Because real love means teaching people that their actions have consequences, even when it breaks your heart. I closed the door on them and returned to the living room. The cake sat uneaten on the coffee table. The coffee had gone cold. I sat down in Richard's chair, my chair, and finally let myself cry. The next 3 months were brutal. All 3 children signed the settlement agreements within the week. Thomas's signature was angry, his pen tearing the paper in places. Margaret included a long letter trying to justify their actions and begging for forgiveness. Sarah's envelope contained only the signed agreement, no note, no explanation. The repayment process was complex. Margaret had to sell her Chicago condo. Thomas had to buy himself out of his business partnership and take out a significant loan. Sarah liquidated her savings and took an advance against her signing bonus at her new job. I didn't feel sorry for them. I felt tired and sad and older than my 72 years. They made their payments on time. 3 cashier's checks delivered by messenger, not in person. $680,000 total. I deposited the checks and then sat in my bank's parking lot for an hour, staring at the deposit receipt. I was financially secure now. More than secure, I was wealthy. But I'd lost my children in the process. Or maybe I'd never really had them at all. The weeks turned into months. None of my children called. I heard through the grapevine, Mrs. Chun, who knew everything, that Margaret had moved in with a roommate in a less expensive part of Chicago. Thomas's wife had left him, blaming him for their financial troubles. Sarah had started her new job, but was reportedly miserable. I tried to feel vindicated. I tried to feel like justice had been served. Mostly I just felt lonely. It was Patricia who pointed out the irony. We'd become friends of sorts, meeting for lunch once a month. You spent 5 years giving them money to keep them close, she said over salads one afternoon. And now you've taken money from them that's driven them away. Money really is the root of all evil, isn't it? The love of money, I corrected automatically. The quote is, the love of money is the root of all evil. And did you love the money, Evelyn? I thought about this. No. I loved being needed. I loved being the mother who could help. Taking their money back wasn't about the money either. It was about respect. About dignity. About teaching them that I'm not a doormat, not an ATM machine, not just mom who exists to serve their needs. Did they learn the lesson? I don't know. I haven't spoken to them in 4 months. Patricia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Give it time. But I wasn't sure there was enough time left. I was 72 years old. How many years did I have? 10? 20 if I was lucky? Did I want to spend them estranged from my children? The call came on a Tuesday evening in February, 8 months after the confrontation. It was Sarah. Mom. Her voice was tentative, like she was 12 again and had done something wrong. Sarah. I know I have no right to call. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. But I needed to tell you something. I waited. I'm in therapy. I've been going twice a week since last summer. Working through a lot of things about Dad, about family dynamics, about why we did what we did. And my therapist says I need to take responsibility. Not make excuses, not try to justify it, but just acknowledge what I did and apologize. So that's what I'm calling to do. I sat down, my heart pounding. Mom, I stole from you. We all did, but I can only speak for myself. I stole from you and then I lied to you for 5 years. I took your money knowing I didn't need it, knowing I was deceiving you. And it was wrong. It was deeply, profoundly wrong. I hurt you, I betrayed your trust, and I destroyed our relationship. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She was crying now, but she pushed through. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to want me in your life. But I needed you to know that I understand what I did. And I'm ashamed of it. And I'm trying to be a better person. That's all. There was a long silence. Sarah, I finally said, my own voice thick with tears. Are you free for lunch on Sunday? I heard her sharp intake of breath. Really? Really? I can't promise everything will be fine. I can't promise I'll ever forget what happened. But I can promise to listen. And maybe that's where we start. We had lunch that Sunday at a little cafe near the park where I used to take her when she was small. It was awkward and painful and we both cried more than once. But it was also honest in a way our relationship had never been before. I need to ask you something, I said over coffee. Why did you do it? Why did your father write that will? And why did you and your siblings think it was okay to act on it? Sarah stared into her cup for a long time. Dad was angry, she finally said. At the end, when he was dying, he was so angry at everything and everyone. He was angry at his body for failing, angry at the doctors for not being able to save him, and angry at you for being healthy when he wasn't. I felt like I'd been slapped. At me. He never said it directly, but I think he resented that you were going to go on living, that you'd have years and years ahead of you while he was dying at 68. And I think he resented that he'd worked so hard his whole life, saved all that money, and he wouldn't get to enjoy it. So he decided you wouldn't either. That's... I couldn't find words. Horrible? Unfair? Yeah. And we knew it, Mom. Margaret, Thomas, and I talked about it. We knew that will was written out of anger and spite, not out of love or wisdom. But we were young and selfish, and Dad had given us permission to be greedy, and we took it. She looked up at me, her eyes red. We told ourselves we'd take care of you, that you'd never know the difference, that we'd make sure you were comfortable. But then we just kept taking, and it became normal. You were giving us money, and we had money hidden away, and it just became this sick dynamic where everyone was lying to everyone. Did it ever occur to you to just tell me the truth? All the time. I wanted to tell you so many times. But I was scared. Scared you'd hate me, scared of the legal consequences, scared that Margaret and Thomas would turn on me if I broke ranks. So I stayed silent, and the lie got bigger and bigger until it felt too big to ever address. I reached across the table and took her hand. I'm glad it got addressed. I'm glad I found that will. Me too, she said. I think it would have destroyed us eventually. Better to blow it up and rebuild than to live in a house with a rotting foundation. That lunch was the first step. There were many more steps after that, more conversations, more therapy, for both of us separately and together. More tears and recriminations and slow, painful healing. Margaret and Thomas eventually reached out as well, though their apologies were less fulsome, their therapy less intensive. Margaret I've forgiven more or less. We have lunch once a month and talk on the phone weekly. It's not what it was, but it's something. Thomas I'm still working on. He's the most like his father, proud, stubborn, bad at apologizing. We're cordial but distant. Maybe someday that will change. The house on Maple Street is still mine. Legally, indisputably mine. I've redecorated the study. It's a reading room now, filled with light and comfortable chairs and shelves full of books. The desk is in storage. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore, with all its secret compartments and hidden betrayals. I'm 73 now. I have my health, my friends, my book club, and my volunteer work. I have $0.7 million in investments that will see me through whatever years I have left. And I have my dignity. That's what this was really about, in the end. Not the money, though the money mattered. Not revenge, though there was satisfaction in seeing consequences. It was about dignity, the dignity of being treated as a person with rights and feelings, not just as a mother whose only purpose is to give and give and give until there's nothing left. My children stole from me. I made them pay me back. And in doing so I taught all of us really, that love without respect is worthless. That family without honesty is just a pretty lie. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is demand that people treat you as you deserve to be treated. Was it worth it? Losing years of a relationship with my children, causing them financial hardship, forcing them to confront their own capacity for cruelty? Yes. 1,000 times yes. Because the alternative was to pretend I didn't know. To go on writing checks and accepting lies and letting them think that Mom would always be there, always giving, always forgiving no matter what they did. And I deserved better than that. I am Evelyn Margaret Hartwell. I was a teacher, a wife, a mother. I am still all of those things in different ways. But I am also a woman who stood up for herself, who demanded justice, who refused to be taken advantage of. That secret will Richard left behind ended up being a gift in a strange way. It forced me to see the truth about my family, the good and the bad. It forced me to find my strength. It forced my children to grow up and face what they'd done. We're all better for it, even though it nearly broke us. And if I could go back to that Tuesday morning when I found that envelope in the secret compartment, would I do anything differently? Not a single thing.